The fourth speaker, Caroline Sinders, they is sick and they cannot come today, but we still have three speakers with lots of knowledge to share with us. I would like to quickly introduce them to you. Paula Helm, on the left of me, she's an assistant professor empirical ethics, science and technology studies. Welcome, give it up for Paula. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then to the right, Arela Lemmens, full professor of customer analytics at the Rotterdam School of Management. Give it up for Arela. And Caroline Figueroa, assistant professor in digital health equity. Welcome, super happy that you're here. Yeah. Also, a really warm welcome for the people that are looking at us digital. Many people from all over the country. Super happy that you are joining in. Yeah, you can look back, there's the camera. I can see them. They join us today. And of course, all the people here in Amsterdam. Are you excited? I'm asking, are you excited? All right. We're about to start. But before we dive into this topic, I would like to get to know you a little bit better. And I'm super curious, who is already familiar with AI? Raise your hand if you're already familiar with AI. Quite many people, but not everyone. All right, who's using AI on a daily basis? That can be ChatGPT or maybe a menstruational app that collects data of you on a daily basis. Who is using AI? I think maybe half of the room. Yeah. That's your work, so that's different. All right, so I hope you will get some answers today on the questions you have. We have two Q&As in this program, one halfway and one on the end of the program. So please save your questions for them, for that moment. Write them down, write them in your phone, and then I will come to you with my microphone. For the people digital joining us, save your question and there will be a Menti code. And I will explain it later to you. And you can log in with the code and send me your questions. They will be here on my iPad and then I can ask the question for you. All right, let's dive into our subjects. But before we do that, I would like to introduce you a little bit more about FemData. The co-founders are here in front of me. Please join us on our stage. Can I have a big applause for Mirte and Pauline? Welcome. You are the co-founders of FemData. Please come a little bit more closely to the microphone so everyone can hear you correctly and crystal clear. Who are you? What's your background? And why did you start at FemData?
So we're two PhD students at the University of Amsterdam. We started FemData because we noticed that a lot of people are working on AI. We both work with data ourselves a lot. But most people just focus on their own field and don't really talk to each other. And whenever we were talking about data bias, we got very different answers depending on their discipline. So we thought, okay, let's do something about it. So we created FemData. The university has been really kind to also offer us grants with the Sustainable Future grant that allows us to do all of these things. So thank you to them. And we've been hosting different talks, panels, but also specific like individual talks. And now with Pakhuis de Zwijger, which we're super excited about.
Yeah, super cool. Yeah. What's the goal of FemData?
The goal is to meet people, learn from other people, get people talking about it, but also now hopefully reach people that don't maybe know that much about AI, so outside of academia, have a discussion about what it actually is and what we should do about it. Yeah.
And there's a series of 3 evenings, so today is the first evening. I hope to see you all back the other events. Is that a deal? Okay. So we are building up the topics. Why do we start with bias in data today?
Yeah, so the reason why we're starting out with that is because, as Marita already said, there's different definitions for this. So if you ask a statistician, their answer will look very, very different from, for instance, if you ask a sociologist. So a statistician might focus more on topics like, okay, how do my performances differ between different subgroups, and a sociologist might focus a little bit more on, okay, I have these power structures in society and how does this trickle down into the data application. So that's why we're also super happy right now to have people from different disciplines tonight, because we think that that's going to give a more interesting discussion and a more well-rounded perspective on the topic, and that's why we're starting out with that.
Yeah, cool, awesome. So what's your definition of bias in data?
I don't think there is one definition. Like she said, there are very different definitions. Within my field, my specific field, we borrow from a lot of different disciplines. And I think we were just talking about it before. Everyone has a different definition. We haven't really decided on one. So maybe tonight we can narrow it down a little bit more.
Great. All right, give it up for FemData. Thank you so much. Yeah, I will take a seat as well here on the stage because we will dive into the different topics of bias in data, and there's so much to tell. So we narrowed the program down into 3 parts. The first part is what is bias in data. We will discuss it with our panel, different experts from different fields. Then after that, we will dive in the topic, how is data bias influenced by our social structures? So we will have a conversation about social structures. What are they? How do they influence the bias? And then to wrap it up, at the end of the evening, we will talk about methods to solve bias in data. Before we do that, I would like to give a little bit more space for the speakers. Paula Helm, you teach critical AI studies at empirical ethics. What does that mean? I never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's also a completely new field, actually. There's a field called critical data studies, which starts from the assumption that data is never raw. So the idea that there's neutral data is a myth. It doesn't exist. It always depends on who is collecting the data, who is analyzing the data, who is working with the data, where does the data come from. And from that field and this basic assumption developed AI, critical AI studies, which sort of goes further and also looks into not just into data, but also into models, in the political economies from which AI emerges and that drive AI. And also, the data centers, the hardware, the infrastructures, everything to do with AI. So it broadened the scope of critical data studies, but still on the assumption that all these issues are never neutral, but they depend on the interest of people, their backgrounds, from where they think, from where they act, from their experiences, but also how they look and how society judges them, which also influences how you see the world. So all that goes into AI, and we analyze that. And then ethics comes in, that also as a next step, the question is, what are sort of good perspectives? So if you assume this is never neutral, there's always sort of values and judgments being built into these systems. And empirical ethics tries to ground really these moral reasonings, these normative judgments about a harmful or a good AI for good or a harmful AI system in empirical observations and analysis, and that might be working very closely with specific communities on the ground who might then eventually use an AI system and being affected by them. So what for them would be, a desirable solution to what for them a problem is, because also who's defining problems influences what the problem is.
Paula, is that what we see in the background, or what do we see?
Okay.
Is that what you told us about the community?
This is super, a little pet project. That's I worked with a community, for example, that's really on the ground, with an indigenous community in the Amazon who speak in indigenous languages, and as many of you might know, these languages they're being lost at a rate that rivals the loss of biodiversity, which means it's super quick. So they are dying out, these languages. Often they are oral languages, so when they die out, they're gone. And these languages are more than just communication, but there's a lot embedded in them. And so we worked with this community because due to the smartphone, which is not available in these languages, none of the apps, the language is threatened to be dying out. And we developed one magazine about water quality, because that's a topic that matters to these people, and translated it in different languages. And the first ever translation of Sateremave, that's the language, is there behind you. So this is one little pet project, and then we thought about how can that be embedded into a large language model that would then find its entry into applications. How can that be done in a way where it is the community that will eventually benefit from this, and not a big tech company, or not, at least.
And
not
that's where I'm going to interrupt you, because I heard you say like large languages. How do you say it? Large language gaps, large
language models.
Models.
You mean?
Yeah, it's about what languages do we use in AI and in big data, and that's where we will talk a little bit more further on in this program. So keep that in mind. And if I forgot it, point your finger and ask us, what was the thing with the language going on? All right, next to you is Aurélie Lemmens, full professor of customer analytics at Rotterdam School of Management. What does your research focus on?
Very different. So I'm working at the Rotterdam School of Management at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. I have a background in statistics applied to marketing in particular. And over the years, I've been helping different kind of organization, can be for-profit organization, like, for example, energy provider companies, but also non-profits, for example, charities, in designing better, personalized way to communicate with their customers or with the donors in the case of charities. And so what we do, we try to leverage all kind of data that's available. That's, of course, a lot of data. Or we think about new data that we could collect, for example, via A/B testing, field experiment. And then we try to see how we can actually extract information from this data in a way that then companies or organizations can actually personalize the communication with those customers. And that's when this topic then started playing a role, because then we realized that when you start personalizing your communication with different customer groups, maybe you even unintentionally start discriminating against specific protected group of the population. And hence my interest for this topic.
Yeah, and personalized data will also come back in our conversation. So what are the pros and the benefits of personalized data, but also what are the dangers in that? So we will come back to you later on that. Caroline, you're a medical doctor and professor at the TU Delft. You're also the director of RISE. What does that stand for?
Yes, I have a research group which is called RISE. It's research on inclusion, social justice, and equity in digital health. So what I focus on mainly in my work is the development of digital health tools that can help people with health, mental health. So you can think of things like apps and chatbots. And what I look at is there's many of these new applications being developed. So I look a lot of mental health, and if you, I don't know if anyone here uses a mental health app, but we have around 20 to 30,000 different mental health apps available in app stores. But they're not all very useful. They're not all safe. They're not all based on evidence. So what I do is I look at how can we design all of these tools in a better way so that they can benefit the mental health of everyone.
Yeah, super interesting. And RISE, the meaning of it is research on inclusion, social justice, and equity in digital health, right?
Yes.
All right. So why is it so important that there's research going on for these apps? Because there's so many apps.
Yeah, it's very important to look at the equity part. So when we talk about equity in digital health, it's really about giving people the opportunity, giving everyone the opportunity to benefit from digital health tools. And should I explain this?
Yeah, what do we see?
Yeah, so one example of a bias that can exist in digital health tools that is very striking. Imagine, well, you don't have to imagine because these things actually exist. So there have been companies that are developing symptom checkers, so you can chat with the bots and tell it your symptoms, and then you get a diagnosis probability. And maybe we can go back to the previous. No. yes, this is a different example. Yeah, so there was a AI bot that was being used by the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, and they at some point there was someone who started testing out this bot, and what this person found, it was a professor working at a university, was that if you put in the symptoms of a heart attack, so classic symptoms of having chest pain, of being short of breath, and you and he tested it, but he changed one variable, which was the gender. So for the male user, the probability of having a heart attack came up. So the app said, yeah, maybe you're having a heart attack, you should visit your physician. Whereas for the female user, there was only a diagnosis probability of depression or anxiety. Yeah, so you can imagine that can have really large consequences, and it reflects historical biases in data. So that's one of the things that keeps me up at night, and I try to work on.
Well, thank you for that. It's so important that there's research going on about that. Let's dive in our first part of the evening, which is called What is Bias in Data? Caroline, you already gave us a small example of bias in data, like sexism, almost. Can you give another example of bias in medical apps?
Yeah, I think there are many biases in medical apps. So one example was here the example of the sexism in apps. There are other examples because it's talking about male female, but I can give you plenty of examples. Another one that I think is quite striking is there was an app developed for detecting skin cancer. So you can take a picture of a lesion that looks like skin cancer. And what research showed was that the app was a lot better at predicting skin cancer for people with lighter skin. So what that also shows was the training data consisting of images of lighter skin leading to worse predictions for dark skin. So you can see there are these biases, for sexism, racism. I can give you a lot of different examples, but what ends up happening is that the technology works better for some people than for others, and that's harmful.
Yeah, and the systems are building up on data. Paula, can you explain to us what, in your opinion and from your expertise, bias in data is?
I get the abstract question again. So I don't want to say from a philosophical standpoint, because there are also a lot of different schools in philosophy, of course. So from the school that I identify with and that I sort of mobilize in my work also, there's no such thing as unbiased technology, because it's always just a fraction of the reality that can be sort of processed. And so vice versa, there's always assumptions, perspectives being embedded in technology. But why are we talking so much about bias? Because sometimes bias can be discriminatory. For example, if it reflects historical racism, sexism, but also today. I mean, this is like, of course, history is a continuum. So that's when we really need to pay attention to bias. And this is, I think, also why it's so much discussed in the media.
Yeah, and you also did a research. It's called Diversity and Neocolonialism in Big Data. Can you share an example of bias that you found while doing this research?
Well, that's a paper that's really very much targeted at my own community, so I should maybe not talk about it now. But so this is maybe interesting, or I find it very interesting, the one with the language modeling bias, because in this research, we looked, for example, at apps like Google Translate, very mundane apps. And we looked at how Google Translate creates flawed results when you use it for languages that are not English. For example, we always use this example because it's very clear with the word rice, where in English you only have the word rice, and when you want to say cooked rice, you need an adjective, or raw rice, you need an adjective, raw cooked, while in other languages there are different words for that. So if you translate it, you might get a flawed result, and you might, for example, translate the Swahili sentence, this rice is tasty, and you get the English version, the raw rice is tasty. And we call that language modeling bias and not data bias, because this is not just a data issue, and that's really crucial in these times where many of us use apps that are built on large language models. These huge models that are claimed to be language agnostic, foundation models, multi-purpose models, they are primarily trained mostly on English data because the entire computer science community and culture is very Anglo-centric, also historically. Very early on, these models take English as the ground truth, and then you can fit further language data on top, and it will perform well on these languages, very impressively well. But there will be mistakes because English is not everything, and because the world is very diverse. And these little mistakes are not so bad in daily life, like when we want to buy an ice cream or order rice, nobody will bother, it will be maybe even funny. But when these systems are used in high-stakes areas, like migration in this case, a little mistake can threaten the life chances of a person. And is being done, and that's really problematic, and that cannot be solved by simply adding data. So we sort of complicate this story that we only need more data with this research, which I think is very important that we realize that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Super interesting. Super interesting. Aurélie, bias in AI also involves who builds the models, who is funding the research, who is behind the process from the technology. Can you share some common management mistakes while building an application?
That's a good question. And I just want to start by saying that I think most of these mistakes are actually unintentional. I think most of the examples that you see in real life by companies and other organizations are actually unintentional, so we don't want to accuse anyone of doing it on purpose. I think some of the mistakes can come, originally people thought we should not include information about sensitive attributes in those models, right? So for example, let's not enter data on gender or income or ethnicity into those models. And of course, when the computer science literature started, people did that without realizing, and that obviously created bias in those models. Then we realized it's not a good idea. We removed those data from the models, right? So we thought, okay, now we're going to be safe. We were not safe. Actually, there was still as much discrimination, even while removing the data. Why? The intuition is that because there is correlation between those data that you have removed and the data that's still in the model. Think about, for example, income and zip code data, right? So we know that some zip codes, some areas are poorer than others. So if you include the zip code information, because you want to do well, you might still do bad because you actually discriminate based on income, right? So even excluding those attributes was not sufficient. And they can be more complicated cases. You can have also cases that some specific people are underrepresented. Think about minorities. And if they are underrepresented, then the model will find it harder to estimate with precision what the behavior of these people will be, right? Because it's simply less observation available. And so as a consequence of that, then you also get worse model for specific groups of people, which happens to be the people you actually want to protect. Right? So this is very complicated. It's a multidimensional issue.
Yeah. And I see something popping up behind us. Is that a research from you, and what is it about?
No, it's not a research for me. It's one of the many cases of discrimination in business or in marketing by companies. This is multiple cases in one. Maybe just to explain the easy one. So you know that nowadays companies can advertise with digital advertising, right? For example, on social media platforms like Meta, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. And of course, those platforms have very sophisticated algorithm to decide which kind of audience should see a specific ad. Right? So landlords, for example, or renting companies are using those platforms to advertise houses for renters, right? The problem is that sometimes the algorithm charge is actually showing the ads too often to some specific group and not often enough in some other specific groups, right? A very famous example, not this one, STEM job ads. So ads for maybe some of you here interested into quantitative jobs, technical jobs, right? So those ads were shown less often to women than men, not because Meta is bad, but simply because young women are priced, are usually advertising to young women is actually more expensive than advertising to men. Why? Because they are very good audience, actually. So they can bring a lot of money for companies. They click more easily on those ads. And so as a reason, as a consequence, the price increase for targeting this woman. And unfortunately, that meant that they were less likely to see those ads because it was too expensive. So an algorithm that would actually try to maximize cost efficiency would not target female, right? Which is actually very unfortunate, right? Because actually, if they would have seen that, they would have for sure clicked on it because yes, we also want to have STEM jobs, right? So that's.
Are there people working in marketing, advertising, AI? Raise your hand. Someone in the corner, like. Do you have any advice for people who work in marketing, advertising? Maybe people who are watching from home, like how to be aware of the targeting and the bias that comes with that.
You mean as a consumer or as a decision maker?
As a decision maker.
That's also a difficult question. So first, I think events like this are very good because it just makes people more aware about those kind of problems. For example, in my class, I'm teaching customer ethics at Erasmus. I have a full lecture on this topic where I let students discuss a business case that involved discrimination. And then they have to find solution for it. I think this is a good way, awareness. And then be more careful about what data you want to collect. Be careful that there might be bias in this data, in the labeling of those data, in the fact that some group might be underrepresented, like I said earlier. And then see if you can actually develop an algorithm that actually take care of fairness, right? So you can tweak the algorithm. We're going to talk about that later, I think. You can tweak the method in order to make it more resistant to discrimination.
Yeah. To end this first part of our conversation, Paula, can you explain to the audience what is the connection between human rights and AI? It's a really big question. Just dropped it there.
I mean, human rights are also, of course, based on ethical considerations about preventing harm and granting everyone equal chances. And if we use AI in more and more areas of our lives as optimizers, decision-making support systems, and we grant a lot of authority to these systems, there's also this idea of this saying of math washing. I like that very much, that because you think, it's based on data and numbers, so it must be the truth. Then, of course, societies hand over much more responsibilities to AI. So, of course, rights need to apply to this system. Then also there's this whole issue of data labor. AI does not come for free, obviously. There we have to think about sustainability. The SDGs are affected by AI because it will be a huge issue for the planet if, these very energy-hungry systems are applied everywhere. Then the labor rights of workers who work in the AI supply chain that starts with the hardware and the mines, and it goes further to the data workers who annotate the data, who look. It's called red teaming, when you sort of penetrate a system to see where it might produce harmful content, so that the average user might not see that, but there are people behind that who look for preventing this from happening for the companies. And often they work in shadow economies in poor countries with no minimum wage, for very minimum wage then. So this is just a fraction of the human rights issues that are being provoked by the whole situation around AI and rapid development.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, there's so much that we don't see behind the data, and we try to make a little bit visible today, but obviously we cannot share all the insights. Part 2 of our conversation is about how data bias is influenced by our social structures. Aurélie, can you explain how social structures influence bias in data?
Can you rephrase the question differently?
Yeah, can you explain to us, maybe give examples of social structures that influence biases in data?
So, bias in data, I think, exists from the moment that you're going to take decision based on this data, right? So it's actually, that's why I had a difficult time to answer this question, because I think it depends what you want to do with this data, right? If you want to do this use this data for targeting purposes, for example, in marketing, then I think social structures can influence this decision if the decision maker doesn't realize that it can do something harmful. So if you don't have good auditing tools, right? If the company is not aware that they could be discriminating some specific groups, I think this is when it can happen. But I think what's funny is that I think there has always been discrimination. We know that, right? Unfortunately, society has always been discriminating some groups. But when the human was making the decision, we knew there was discrimination, but somehow we took it as for granted, right? This is the way it is, and we tried to correct it, but this is just the way it is. Now that machines are taking over and guide decision makers to make decisions, suddenly scrutiny increases, right? We become more about the fact that this might be a bad thing, because if the machine does it, that must be bad. And this is something, actually, it's part of consumer psychology research, actually. There's been a lot of research on that. When a machine takes a decision, it's interpreted very differently than if the human being would take a decision. And somehow we give less credit to a machine than to human. And why I'm saying that, because I think it's actually maybe to think a positive tone. Maybe it's actually an opportunity for us, because if we are more scrutinous with the decisions, then maybe also going to pay more attention to it, more aware that there could be problem. And you actually see it happening. There are more and more companies, like of course the big tech in the US, like Amazon and Google. They actually have huge department of researchers who are in charge of ethics and algorithmic fairness. But also here in Europe, like we have Booking.com here across the street, actually. They have also a team of scientists who actually try to make sure that the algorithm on the website Booking is actually also fair, right?
How do they do that?
Oh, can you do that? Well, well, that's complicated. First of all, you need to define what is fairness, and we had this discussion earlier. You can have different kind of definition of fairness, and people don't always agree, but you take one definition in mind, and based on that, you can actually measure if the algorithm is fair or not. I can give you more detail if you want, but I don't know if this is the moment for that. But yeah.
Maybe later. We can talk about this the whole evening. Yeah. It's a topic. There are so many sides of it. So, yeah. But thank you so much. Paula, can AI models be both fair and profitable?
That depends on your definition of fairness. I think my definition of fairness, or my claim for justice, I would rather say, could make it a bit complicated, potentially. But there are definitely ways to interpret fairness that are, and of course, I mean, if you can prevent PR damage from your company, that's profitable. But then if a society doesn't give that much anymore about these things, that might also not matter anymore that much. I mean, it also, I would say that this question is often answered with the PR argument.
Yeah. But Caroline, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there are definitely some examples where it can be very harmful for a company to have unethical or unfair AI. So from my field of mental health, there are several examples. I can give you one. So there was there's a chatbot. This was in the US for people with eating disorders. It's from the National Eating Disorder Association. And this chatbot was used for a very long time, was quite successful. But at some point, a user noted, exactly. So at some point, one of the users noted that when they were chatting with this bot, it actually started giving them advice how to lose weight. And if you have an eating disorder, anorexia, then you do not want to lose weight. So what happened is that this company that developed this chatbot started experimenting with AI. So as where it was first it was a rule-based chatbot, so that means that it gives you examples that are made beforehand, and now it started using generative AI, so the conversation is a lot less predictable. But the National Eating Disorder Association said that they were not aware of these changes being made. So without their knowledge, this chatbot was actually using generative AI, and then they ended up stopping the chatbot. So I think this is one example where if you're doing something that's not ethical or fair, then it can damage your company.
Are there vulnerable groups that we have to keep in mind while designing data?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I would say groups that are already more vulnerable include people that are lower income, that are less healthy, that may have less knowledge about AI, lower digital skills. And another group that I'm also very interested in is children and young people. So children and young people, they're growing up in a world with AI, in a world where we're using chatbots and conversing with AI for lots of things. And there was recently some research from the University of, I think it was Oxford, that found that there is an empathy gap for children, meaning that children place a different meaning to conversations with chatbots. So they might be more prone to thinking that chatbots are real. So we have to have more guardrails for these vulnerable groups.
What do we see on the screen? Because you're talking about the teens and this was popping up. Teens are talking to AI companions whether it's safe or not.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone heard about this example. This is another very striking example. This was a chatbot. It's character AI, so it's a chatbot where you can chat with a persona that you can design yourself. And there was a case late last year where a teenager was in the US was chatting with a chatbot and developed a love relationship with this chatbot. And then it got to such a point where he wanted to be with the chatbot, and then he committed suicide. And his family found the conversations, and it seemed like he at least was partly motivated by the idea of being together with this bot. So then they ended up also suing the company. But yeah, I think this is one example of where you can see how you need to protect vulnerable users.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Heavy. Yeah. Let's dive into our reflection already with Paulina and Mirza for this first topic, because there's so much more to discuss about this. So please join me on stage. I will stand on the left, you can stand on the right. Like, if you heard all this information, is there any form or sort of bias that we didn't hear and that you would like to highlight?
I don't think so.
Can you talk into the... Thanks.
I don't think so. I think I heard like really different perspectives. I just want to say the examples of the teens I've never seen, so they were quite shocking to see. So thank you for sharing. But when it comes to your question, I don't think so. Maybe you have a different idea.
No, I think we've covered the part where biases can arise from the social structure. So as I said in the beginning, something can trickle down into the way you collect data based on like societal biases we already have, like gender biases, racial biases, and so on. And I think we've also briefly talked about some of the technical ones. And I think we're going to dive into that a little bit more in a few minutes from now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and we heard some examples that are quite shocking. But do you also see like positive opportunities for data in the future? And what is it? Take us to the future a little bit.
I think by no means are we trying to be pessimistic today. It's just that there's a lot to cover on that front. But there are so many examples of AI for good, and I think a lot of companies and NGOs are also working on that. If you think about medical apps or even within marketing, there are a lot of examples of how you can reach, let's say, the STEM ads, how we can actually reach the people that we would want to close the gender gap with. You just have to be very careful and talk about it and see if there are any issues. Yeah.
Caroline, can you give us a positive example of maybe a health application that is using data for a really vulnerable group in a good way?
Yeah, I think I do want to highlight that there is definitely a lot of potential of AI, and also in the mental health field. Because, for mental health, we know that there are many people, like 1 in 5, who have mental health problems. But if you look at, the availability of services, people need to wait more than 14 weeks to get mental health treatment. So there's a very big gap. There's not enough psychologists. So using technology like these AI chatbots or other types of apps, mindfulness, for example, could really make a big difference. And there are definitely some good and safe apps that you can use. One resource that I point people to normally is the in Dutch the GGD App Store. So they have rated apps, so you can also see the quality. But there is still a lot of work to be done to make sure that all of these tools are better regulated, are more safe and more effective.
Yeah. In your opinion, like the development of AI and data is going really fast. But what about the laws? Are we like walking far behind, and how far, or is it okay for now?
Very far behind.
Yeah.
Short answer. Yeah.
You agree with that?
Yeah, I would say,
Thanks.
obviously I'm not a lawyer. My PhD is in prediction modeling, but I think there's just the speed in which the computer science and also the statistics community is developing stuff is just so high. And implementation of like legal frameworks is just, it takes such a long time that it's really hard for them to catch up, I think. But again, I'm doing research on more of the technical aspects. So who knows?
I can imagine that you have questions. So here it is. Here is the moment for the Q&A. For the people at home, I have the code for you here on my screen. The code is 89369137. Will it be also in the chat box? Can I see it? All right, perfect. So you can fill it in, and the questions will be shown on my screen. But for now, we also have a microphone, I think, in the audience. Gio, are you walking around with the microphone? Or yeah? All right, give an applause for Gio. He will come to you with the microphone. Thank you so much. He's the brand new intern of Pakhuis de Zwijger. Super cool. Does someone has a question? You can ask it to the panel. This is your chance. Who dares? Yeah, I see with the glasses. Yeah.
Is there a difference between the bias globally versus Europe? Because I hear a lot of USA examples, and we have different European regulations regarding privacy, or is that equal?
Interesting question. Who wants to answer it? What is the difference between the UA and the US or America?
Talking about privacy, so we have GDPR in Europe. In California, they have the CCPA, Consumer California Protection Act, which actually are relatively similar to each other. And so they require that customers can actually decide which information they want to share, right? The rest of the US is, let's say, a bit more liberal. They don't have that. So it gives us, as a consumer in Europe, gives us a little bit more control about what kind of data you want to share, which is good. But to be honest, I think when I ask my students, do you share your cookies? I think most of them actually just click on accept, right? It's very rare. People have this, we call that the privacy paradox, right? So you say you care about privacy, but actually in action, you actually share much more than you claim you would do. And in part, it's because we do get some benefits from it, right? If you share more, you also get more personalized offer. So I think we are better off in Europe, but the danger is still the same. By the way, what's also very interesting is in Europe nowadays, the computer scientists have a very big challenge because they, so now there is this promise that as a consumer, you can ask to get the data back. But the question is, what does that mean? Does that mean that the companies actually have to unlearn what they've learned, from those consumers? So there's a lot of new methods actually now developing in order to be able to do that, which is becoming very super difficult to do. So we are not there yet.
How do you unlearn machine learning?
Yeah, machine unlearning it's called.
All right, maybe countries like from outside the EU that we can get inspiration from?
Yeah,
policy?
So I would say that, well, actually, this is a really good question. I mean, if you have listened at the AI Summit in Paris, compare Ursula von der Leyen's talk with the vice president, there is some difference in strategy. And maybe Europe is going more for decentralized and targeted route, like really having targeted solutions for specific user groups, companies, sectors, domains, which also from an ethical perspective, I think would solve a lot of issues related to power, which comes with a whole lot, I mean, you can never think, I think, about ethics without power. But I mean, this is only a future agenda. But then if you compare these two, and I like your question because you ask, does it actually pay? Like, can you see it? Is it visible somewhere? I would say I don't know of any clear example that I would be confident to share. And that's actually, like not so nice. I should, and I hope maybe in a few years from now I could tell you a whole lot. But I mean, there is definitely, if you, for example, two security companies that are very big in the security sector, Palantir and IDEMIA. IDEMIA is a French company. Palantir is a US company. I think most of you have heard about Palantir. And IDEMIA is clearly trying to differentiate itself from Palantir to get also deals with, for example, the German government, who are very worried about ethics and privacy, and if it's being used in public police investigations. And so IDEMIA does try to sort of be not the very bad guy and leave that role to Palantir. Maybe that's an example, and that also might result also in systems that are more attuned to really the user side. I would say not so much maybe the citizen side. I would not go that far, but the user side for sure.
Thanks. Does it give an answer to your question? All right. I will dive into a question online and then I will come to you. The question online is, if data and technology is not values neutral, why are we speaking about bias itself solely in a negative context? Is there a space or potential for a positive bias? Caroline, can you answer this question? It are three questions in one. It's really interesting, especially the last part. Is there a space or a potential for a positive bias? I like that.
Yeah. I'm not sure if if my answer will answer what the person meant, but I think when I think about positive bias, let me take the health field again. So in health, there's often sometimes there are difficulties in the patient-doctor relationship. Like we know that doctors, when they start off in their career, they have a lot of empathy, and they're very good with patient care. And then the further they get in their career, the lower levels of empathy they have for patients, unfortunately. So there have been a few studies now that have shown that, for example, large language models, when you ask large language models clinical questions, that patients rate the answers that the models give as being more empathetic than of doctors. So yeah, technology doesn't get tired, technology doesn't get burnout, technology is always there for you. So that would be for me what I would see as a positive bias.
Yeah. Interesting, thanks. Yeah. Thank you so much. There was a question in the corner. Who are you and what's your question?
Hey, I'm Vincent Everts. I'm a trend watcher. I want to know, you are, of course, very ethical and very honest and very respectful and privacy and that kind of stuff. Does it slow you down a little bit? Medium, incredible. In your research.
Who wants to react on that?
Does it pay to be honest?
Yeah. Does it pay to be honest?
No, it's very annoying. No, it's really very annoying. And I'm also not a rule-based ethicist, so I'm not so much in favor of all these rules, actually, even though I'm an ethicist. And I don't think it's a paradox, because you can be an empirical ethicist who looks at what matters on the ground, what are the real politics of doing ethics. And also, you know, I mean, it needs to have it needs to not... The ethical way to do it needs to be not in the starkest contrast to what everybody else does. So this is why I also think that rule-based ethics has its limits. And I think that was what you were referring to. And needs to be assessed against the real politics of life. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, we don't have time for another question, but in the end of the program, there will be another block of Q&A. So save your questions, and then I will come back later to you. For now, we're going to dive in methods to solve this. I always like this. It's a more positive approach. Ways to solve this, yeah, and that can be really hard for such an, complicated topic. But a question for you all. One common first notion is that we can solve bias in AI simply by adding more data from marginalized groups. Is it really that simple?
Can I answer this question?
Yes.
Actually working on a research project exactly on that, so I was keen to answer the question. So I work a lot with field experiment data, like I was saying earlier. So we run an A/B test with organizations. And indeed, it sounds very tempting. Say, you know what, you are in control of the data anyway because you're going to run an experiment. So why not just oversample, as we call it, some specific groups of customers, right? For example, minorities. This a priori, it can be a good idea. Why? Because then you can. It's easier to learn behavior, predict the behavior of those people. But that's very inefficient. What's more efficient, that's what I try to do in my research, is actually to anticipate what would be the area of the data space, if you want, where you would learn the most. Right? So you think about your data in terms of where the uncertainty is located. So it's a little bit abstract. I'll make more concrete later. And then you decide to oversample in those spaces. So it could be, for example, among minorities, but it doesn't need to be, right? So just see where in your data you think there is the most potential for learning more. Take, for example, about individuals that are a little bit on the edge. So you don't know if you should send them a specific message or another specific message, right? So they are on what you call the decision boundaries. So then you might decide to actually investigate more what their responses will be. Right? Those that are already on the extreme, you know for sure they're gonna behave in that specific way or in this other specific way. Then you don't need more information for those customers. Right? And it's actually coming back to the point whether it's beneficial for companies. It is because by reducing the uncertainty, you also make all these policies, as we call them, much more effective, much less uncertain, and so it's good for everyone actually. So it doesn't need to be negative.
Yeah. Caroline, what is your experience by adding more data to make sure there is no bias in the data?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it may solve part of the problem, but yeah, it wouldn't solve the entire problem. And maybe to go back to the example that I had in the beginning about the biased a chatbot that was giving advice that was sexist. So if you have more data about women and their risk of heart attack, you'll probably get that will probably solve part of the problem. But then there's still a lot of different design decisions that could contribute to bias. And one example that I always think is also good to think about is that it's not just one. It's not only gender, it's not only race or socioeconomic status, it's also the intersection of these identities. So, for example, we know that women have different symptoms than men for heart attack, but we also know that women of color have more risk of getting heart attacks. So if you don't take those kind of factors into consideration, you might still get biased algorithms. So it's also how you deal with the data and the information.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. If I understood correctly, there are three main ways to reduce bias in AI models. The first one is by pre-processing, like before the training. The second one is in-processing during the model development. And the third one is post-processing after the predictions. Can you give an example, Paula, maybe for the first one, like processing? What can we do in the pre-processing to prevent bias in data?
Well, that question is a bit difficult for me to answer because I said at the beginning that I don't think there's ever no data. So in my view, data is will always be there. So rather than thinking on how to avoid data, we need to, I think, from the get-go of the technology that we want to develop, need to think about what should it serve, and that's already a bias. That's how you select the data. And then, of course, you need to be attentive to discriminatory bias, and you need to think about all the stakeholders that are involved in the process, not only the end users, also other people who might be indirectly affected. So often then the end users are being focused in that stage. So rather than thinking about debiasing, I would say be very frank about what do you want and what do you want to achieve with it and how is that biased and how do you then select your data and clean it and so on. Yeah.
So what if we start at the last part, like the post-processing, like after the production? Do you have an example, like a really concrete example of post-processing?
So that's actually what most organizations actually do. They do post-processing because I think it's actually the easiest. So you just let your algorithm run. You get predictions, for example, risk score for credits. right? The extent to which someone can get a credit line from a credit card, for example. So you get this ranking of your users or your customers, for example, about the credit risk, and then you look whether this ranking is fair according to whatever definition you want to take. So, for example, you say I want to have an equal representation of, let's say, male, female. That would receive access to this credit card, right? And then if you see there that there is actually a difference, let's say, for example, we have 20 men who get access to the credit card and only 10 female, then you're going to just reduce the threshold for the female compared to the male, right? So it's kind of positive discrimination to some extent, right? So that's very easy to do. You don't need to be super quantitative to be able to do it. And you have a very good control on what you're doing, right? And you can decide where you want to stop and where the balance should be for your organization.
Super interesting. Yeah. Caroline, do you have an example of the in-processing, like during the model development?
I'm not sure that is the right question for me to answer.
All right, that's fair enough. Thank you. Maybe you can give a successful example in a different stage?
Yeah, so what I try to do is mainly to work also with the users, the people who are going to be using the algorithm or the AI, in having them help with the decision making from the start. So that could be really the very basic decisions of what should an AI model do, what should the functions be. So, for example, over the last year and a half, I've been doing several groups with young adults to talk about AI for mental health and how do they see AI having a role in mental health care and wellness. To be able to, if we as researchers or developers, develop all of these new tools and chatbots, we need to make sure that they actually align with what people need from them. So that's why we do design research.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because you did a collaboration with youth.
Yeah, so what we do is we go to places where young people come to have workshops where we first explain a little bit about AI for mental health. What is it? What does it do? What are mental health apps? And then we use creative methods, like a design workshop where young people also... we do some storytelling about how do you use an app, in what situation would it be helpful, and they also contribute their own ideas. So they tell us how they think mental health apps and AI could or could not be useful.
Interesting. I like the thought of collaboration, maybe collaboration with your target group before you start designing your own data. How do you look at that, Paula?
Can you...
Like, if you start with the collaboration, before you make data as a company, for example, what can collaboration bring you? Or what can a collaboration bring to vulnerable groups or groups that are otherwise are being out of sight?
Yeah. So I don't think so much with the company mind. This is really not my profession, really. I mean, but I do a lot of collaboration. That's true. And I'm also involved in technology development. So first, I think it's very important from the problem formulation. This is already a very political process. So usually, you first formulate a problem, and then the technical solution, if you want a technical solution or a socio-technical solution or a social solution, maybe also, it might also not be even a technical one. But anyway, so that should already be something that the community is probably best positioned to do, but that is rarely happening in that way.
You did a collaboration in the Amazon, which we saw on the screen. That was also about the language thing you told us. Can you tell us something more about that?
Yes, I love to. Okay, so we have a bigger project where we work with minority languages, all kinds of minority language groups. And so, I mean, sometimes also life happens in certain ways that are arbitrary, but I had someone working with me who comes from the Amazon forest as a postdoc in my team, and so we asked around also there because we wanted to do research there. She also wanted to do that. And then sort of some communities responded, others not. So that's already a good sign. So they haven't. So for them, language, because this research was about language technology, language is an issue and also a technical issue. Otherwise, they would not have invited us because they often also don't want to have anything to do with researchers. So that was already a good start. But then also during that project, that was in 2023, and it was the severest drought in the Amazon with the river water levels very low. It was clear that was the one topic that was on people's minds because it's life-threatening. So we decided to focus every sort of resource development in terms of language data on the water topic because that's the most urgent. And so that's how I think this can also be a process that goes hand in hand and together and reacts to urgent needs of people on the ground.
Yeah, thank you. So in your opinion, what can collaboration bring research in the future? Instead of only researching behind your desk, what could examples like this, like the collaboration, putting something on the agenda, how can collaboration help us with preventing bias in data?
Yeah, so I think it's good to do both. So I really like to go on the ground with people and actually travel there and sleep in a hammock and spend some time there. In an ideal world, I mean, this is not always possible, unfortunately, but I do think it's useful to also combine that with data science to get the bird eye view and to really also, because if you, for example, for the immigration case, to count mistakes done by Google Translate that threatens legitimate asylum claims is a good data science project, because when you really have that data and you have it black on white, the results, that's very powerful. So I think it always needs to be a combination, ideally, of really working with people on the ground, knowing how they live, what are the conditions, what is, you know, what makes their life beautiful, what are their struggles, but also combine it with the bird eye view.
Yeah.
If that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah. To wrap this thing up, we have a Q&A left. So if I can see the microphone, you're still here with the microphone. If you have any questions in the audience, please raise your hand. If you're online, the code will be online again. But I have to walk to the back because this one is out of battery. So I will come for the questions for online to the back. But maybe we can already start with some questions in the audience. So who got questions maybe about collaboration? Don't be shy. Yeah, there's a question.
Thank you all so much for all of your input on this very important topic. So I have a bit of a question about collaboration when we talk about as well the big tech companies, because there's a lot of sort of hoarding of talent, hoarding of data, and they decide a lot about the research projects that go on as well in the AI research world, AI ethics world. They determine a lot about regulation. So I guess I'm just curious how you see this in your own research and how you, when you talk about collaboration and when you talk about really bottom-up stakeholder participation, how does that work in the dependency that we have with these companies?
Yeah, great question. Can you summarize it in maybe a little bit shorter?
Month.
Yeah.
For those familiar. How can we do proper, meaningful stakeholder participation in a world that's dominated by these big tech companies?
Wow. Nice. Good question.
Can I give it a shot? At least the beginning of an answer. Maybe it's a moment also to point out the fact that in Europe, we also try to do independent research, and we have some nice, like the National Adolescent Foundation, who is trying to help us doing that. But of course, if the government decides to cut fundings for research, like they are doing at the moment, this is not going to help us. So maybe this is a moment for me to say that we should be a little bit more careful about what we want in this country, unfortunately. So I think it's possible to work with those big tech companies. I think, to be honest, some of them do excellent research, and they have huge departments that really advance research. And sometimes, I mean, very often they do things that are way more sophisticated than what we do at the universities. Sometimes people collaborate with them. At Cornell, for example, they do a lot of research together with Netflix or Meta, and I think this is really good research and not like from a biased angle, if I can say. I think this is really, really interesting stuff going on. So I don't think I should say, I don't see it as an opposition. I think in Europe there is much less of such collaboration, and we depend more on fundings from governments and things like that. Well, I just don't see it as an opposition. I think it can be good to work hands in hands, and like I said, I think with the current development, maybe actually the only way for us to still do good research actually in collaboration with those companies, unfortunately. So maybe this is where we're going to go.
Yeah. Thanks. You had a question before on the last round. Would you like to ask it now?
It was more like for the first round.
All right. Can we get a microphone?
Okay. So just also to add on to her, so like, how do you think these power structures that are like the monopolies dominated by these big tech companies affect the bias? So that's more like part of the first section of this talk. But yeah, highlighted it a bit. So I was like, might as well just share some insights if you have any.
Yeah. Caroline?
Yeah, so your question was the big tech effects on biases. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think that one of the problems with technology companies, and you definitely see that in the health field, is that they're very focused on creating profits, and actually a lot of the products. The health apps that, for example, I look at. If you look at who are they testing them on. They're usually actually healthy individuals that don't really need to use the apps, but to work with true engagement with patients is a lot more difficult and requires a lot more time and a lot more funding, and not all companies want to do that or have the opportunity to do that. So I really agree that actually working together with companies as academics and trying to bring in the ways of stakeholder engagement and more ethical research, that is very promising. Maybe to add on one thing, I'm going to do a fellowship in the United States this summer, where actually I'll be studying health tech companies and seeing how they engage stakeholders. So maybe next year you can ask me the question again, and I'll have a detailed answer for you.
Nice. Thank you. We have room for another more questions. Let me look around. We didn't hear you before. The microphone is coming to you. Who are you and what's your question?
Yeah, hello, I'm Maaike. We've heard a lot about AI. I was wondering, how do you see the role of women in all that we have discussed?
Good one. Who wants to react on that? The role of women. Does feminism also plays a part in AI and the development of that? What role for women is there?
Well, there's actually more and more women attending quantitative classes, right? I mean, at Erasmus, I think I have 50-50 nowadays, right? So I don't see any difference, and they're as good as the male counterpart, and they're very engaged, and they land amazing jobs as well. So I think the future is brighter, but we just have to hope that once they enter the market space, that they actually get equal opportunities that men, right? But I think at the university, I see actually we are reaching almost an equal representation, at least with us in the business school. So I'm quite optimistic.
Since you are asking this question, maybe you have ideas for yourselves, which you'd like to share with us. What role do you see for women in AI and in big data?
I was asking because it was a FemTech evening. I could say something, but maybe I'm also interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Great. All right, come up. Our co-founders of the FemData. So this is the moment. What is the role of Fem in data? And maybe why also the name of Fem in data? Can you explain to us?
With FemData, we look at it from like a different pipeline. So we're talking about data collection, data modeling, and then the interpretation of data. And I think I'm just speaking for the both of us, but please correct me if I don't cover you. In the talks we had so far, the focus was mostly on how can gender bias seep into all of these different aspects and what to do about it. So one aspect could be hiring more women into these companies and these kinds of research groups, educating men on the importance, just to, make them more aware, tell them that it is an issue and it's not that easy to solve. Another one would be start with children, so educate them on AI use, but also on societal issues, which again is a bit harder in the current political climate, unfortunately. But also talk to women about what they need. For example, we had one really interesting talk about menstruation apps and how they're actually really used against women, their data. There it could have been really useful to talk to women about what they want in those apps. Those are a few examples. Maybe you can add if you have some.
Well, I think what you just said also fits in really, really well with the research that Caroline does, because she works a lot with the communities that actually end up using those apps. And I think, for instance, if we really talk about femtech, like menstruation apps or like just tracking women's health, and that would be, a really important part that's currently not really done if you look at, for instance, the big, very well-used menstruation apps. So, engaging the users in the production of the app that you actually want to end up engaging with. But also, as Marta said, we looked at it from different, we looked at this problem at different stages of the pipeline. And the purpose is to show that it's not as easy as 1, 2, 3, I built my model and then I check for the biases and then I'm fine, but that this, for instance, already trickles in at the data collection stage, and then just like it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's something, for instance, that I see a lot in my work, that people can be a little bit short-sighted about this issue, and that there's just so many other aspects that come into it that are not immediately visible if we just throw the standard methods at it to detect the bias. Yeah.
Thanks. Does that answer your question? All right. I saw also a few questions around here. 3 on a line. All right. Do you have the same question or different? All right. We will bring the mic to you. Super curious.
So first of all, thank you very much. It was very inspiring, very cool to hear all your stories. I have a bit of an ethical dilemma, so I think you're the right persons to ask. So I work with cancer data and AI, and we also work with foundation models, and then we see these work really well on general cases, but not that well on rare diseases or rare cancers. And I think it's the same for minorities in the population. Then there's a trade-off to make. Are we going to make really, really good models that work really well for most of the people? Or are we going to make models that are not as good, but better, like more honest among different groups? And we tried to come up with some methods to do that. But I was just wondering, like, are these things that you are working on? Are there certain solutions? Is there an ethical answer?
Wow. Super interesting question. Yeah, also really hard to answer. Who dares?
I think it's. I think that's a really interesting question, and I don't know if I have an answer of how to do this in a better way, but I think from an ethical standpoint, having equity and social justice is one of the main ethical principles when it comes to health. So you do need to think about whatever I'm developing, and I'm happy that you are thinking about that. Is that harming some people more, or is it less beneficial to some people? So how can you develop something that can where everyone can have equal opportunity to good health? So I hope that you can find some middle way where that's possible.
Yeah, maybe discuss it later on together at the bar. Maybe gives you new insights for work as well. We still have room for one burning question. So who got a burning question? Who doesn't want to go home before this question is answered? Someone who didn't ask a question before. A burning question. No burning questions? Or all right, give it a try.
Thank you so much. I found it really cool and inspiring. Sorry, can you maybe move so I can see that? Thank you. But I was wondering mainly on the AI we use day to day. Do you see a role in the responsibility of the user of the AI? Or do you think other responsibility of managing this bias is more on the people creating it? Because I'm thinking of my mother and her friends who are using ChatGPT as their personal therapist. And I do believe that you still need to be critical. And I also believe that that's why machines get so much scrutiny when they make the decision, because there is so much trust also with the math washing, which you talks about. So, what do you think?
Yeah, can you summarize it in one sentence? And it's more easy for them to answer it.
Do you believe that there is a responsibility in the user, or is it mainly in the creator of the models?
Yeah, crystal clear. Thank you.
So the typical answer that you will hear is literacy. Then the user needs to be, of course, put in a position to make a wise decision. And one step towards that is literacy, so education. But, of course, there are also limits to what the user can do. If you think about GDPR, because we had that before, informed consent, I mean, so with social networks, if you're a teenager, you know, how much choice do you have? So, or what is the quality of your choice if it's about social inclusion or privacy? You know, that's a bit tricky thing there. And then it's wrong to put the responsibility on the user, because it's a farce, because the quality of the choice is not good. So you have to also ensure good quality of choice when you want to place responsibility on the user, is what I would say, combined with education.
Thank you,
Can
Paula.
I add one thing to that?
No, sorry, you have to wrap it up. Yeah, but you can talk a little bit more afterwards. So please feel free to stay and chat with Caroline as well about this topic. For now, we have to wrap this up. What is the key message for you as a partners of FemData that you want to give away? The core message that we take home.
Yeah, so I think that we've seen again that this issue is inherently multidisciplinary. That's a very, very complex question to answer. And that collaboration is really essential, and also collaboration with the users in designing the apps, so that the apps are not designed in a silo, but that we really listen to, for instance, if we work on a mental health app, to people who are actually in these patient populations, and also think about questions related to security. How do we protect them? And think about it in a more structured, think about bias in a more structured way, at like where it can enter and where we can catch it as soon as possible.
Thank you. Is there something you would like to add on that?
Yeah, I think what I found as a takeaway is that actually you all gave an answer that's quite similar in some ways. So I think it's a good learning to know that even though we have very different perspectives or disciplines, that actually we can also overlap a lot.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good learning that I'm going to take away personally today.
Yeah. Thank you. As I mentioned before, this was the first one of a series of 3. On the 17th of March, there will be another one coming up. What will it be about?
Yeah, so in the second event that we have, we're going to dive a bit more into the societal and the political forces driving the development of AI and data science methods, and also like differences in power structures. And yeah, so we'll dive a bit more into the societal aspect of this whole problem.
Yeah. You're all invited, so I hope to see you there. For now, I would like to wrap this evening up by having a really big applause for our partners of FemData. Thank you so much. And of course, a really big applause for our speakers and experts. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and also, of course, a shout out for the people watching from home. Really nice that you joined us this evening. I hope you feel inspired, and I hope to welcome you again at the 17th of March. And of course, a warm applause for yourself as well. Thank you that you were here tonight. Yeah, thank you. Applause for yourself. As you mentioned, our programs are for free at Pakhuis de Zwijger. If you can miss anything, please donate for our programs so we can make it available for everyone. There will be a QR code on the screen. Please, if you can miss anything, so we can make these programs available for everyone, it will be really, really wonderful. I hope you feel inspired, and I want to invite you to join us at the bar to talk and ask your maybe burning questions that you didn't dare to ask before. My name is Arike van Lieren. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Good home. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's really nice. You did a really good job. You too. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.